Hello. So this is an assignment I did recently for my mental health perspective through film. Hold on. I don't know if I'm on the right mic. I think so. Anyway, so what I did is I watched the movie Candy from 2006. The diagnosis in the film is opioid use disorder. My opinion of the entire portrayal is I just want to include this because I think the whole movie is a good example of opioid use disorder, recovery, and codependency with this disorder, and your significant other. I think this is the best fiction movie I've seen on a substance use disorder. So, it says, after watching the movie of your choice, reading your weekly book assignment, and reviewing your lecture notes, apply your knowledge of the mental health diagnosis. So, in the movie Candy, we see a codependent couple who are using heroin together. This couple shows all of the signs of opioid use disorder. In the very beginning of the movie, we see the female, whose name is Candy, take more than she intended and overdose in the bathtub. She started needing more and more to get the same effect that the drugs used to have. The opioid use affects every aspect of their lives. Dan has a hard time keeping a job or a place to live. All their money goes to substances. They start doing whatever it takes to get the substances into their body. The way it ends, I believe, Candy has a higher chance of relapsing than Dan. We see Candy try to actually return to their relationship after being in rehab, but Dan acknowledges that their relationship was a trigger itself. Within the movie, they make multiple attempts at stopping the substance, but are only successful when they are not together. I also noticed in this movie they used music and imagery to show what it feels like when they are on opioids and why they would want to keep feeling this way. So next it says highlight 3 new words to your vocabulary. I already knew these, so once again, I haven't found anything new to add to my vocabulary. I have a hard time finding new vocabulary words. Through my substance use certificate I got at Eastern Maine Community College, I have read a lot about recovery and relapse. The definition of recovery being a return to a normal state of health, mind, or strength. When it comes to substances, their minds are returning to a normal state of not having substances, but because of the damage done to the brain and trauma they may have gone through, they can never fully return to a normal state. This definition also has always felt loose to me because really, what is a normal state when it comes to the human mind? Relapse is defined as a deterioration in someone's state of health after a temporary improvement. When it comes to substance use, relapse means a return to substance after a period of not using. This movie demonstrates the difficulty in recovery and relapse. Honestly, I think if the movie was any longer, we would see Candy relapse back into drugs rather quickly. Even after rehab, she wanted to return to the life she had immediately, and found that Dan wasn't going to allow things to return to normal. So for the third definition, I knew the definition, but having to explain it to my boyfriend has helped me increase my understanding. For the third word, I want to discuss the definition of addiction. For something to be an addiction, the DSM-5 states that the substance has to impaired control, have physical dependency, social problems, and risky use. Addiction includes using more than of a substance than intended, or using it for longer than you were meant to. The example I gave my boyfriend was a businessman who goes to a bar after work and has 1 or 2 beers might not have an addiction if it doesn't impair control, cause physical dependency, or interfere socially, occupationally, or recreationally with the person's quality of life. But if the same businessman becomes dependent on that beer and starts using more than 1 or 2 they intended, then it has become an addiction at that point. So this is part we made a graph that says, now that you've watched the movie, compare it to the DSM-5. So for all of them, the character exhibited, I did both. So the DSM-5 says a problematic pattern of opioid use leading to clinically significant impairment or distress as manifested by at least 2 of the following occurring within a 12-month period. In this movie, it never states when they started using. We are given the impression that Dan most likely started as a teenager and is in his 20s now, and Candy started opioids in the relationship, which we know has been going on for about a year. Then you have, in the DSM-5, it says a problematic pattern of opioid use leading to clinically significant impairment or distress as manifested by at least 2 or more of the following. So from this point on, I'm just going to read the numbers. So 1 here, opioids are often taken in large amounts or over a longer period than intended. Throughout the movie, we see the amounts the couple takes increasing. In the beginning of the movie, we see Candy begging Dan to allow her to try taking the drug intravenously when she had been taking it nasally previously. Also, throughout the movie, we see the amount of the needle increase. It starts at a 1, and before they both start recovery, increase to a 3. There is a persistent desire or unsuccessful efforts to cut down or control the opioid use. Within the movie, they make multiple attempts to cut down and stop. The first time it is mentioned in passing and blown off as a joke. The second time it is mentioned, Candy mentioned stopping, but Dan keeps making excuses for why it isn't the right time. The third time, Candy ends up pregnant, and they close themselves off to try to stop it. This lasted 3 days of withdrawal symptoms before they try to find drugs again, but Candy ends up having a miscarriage. After miscarriage, Candy and Dan start using again. They also discuss using methadone to stop. The fourth time, they stopped using and got into a place in the country. Dan gets a job and comes home to Candy drinking and using again. Her actions trigger him to start using again and lose his job. A great deal of time is spent in activities necessary to obtain the opioid or recover from its effects. The couple both spend a lot of time trying to obtain opioids. Candy starts selling her body for drugs. Both start stealing within the movie. They ask Candy's parents for money multiple times. And Candy even pawns a family heirloom. Craving or a strong desire or urge to use opioids. Throughout the movie, we see them struggle with craving. At one point, we see Dan and Candy at a family function after their wedding, and they run to the bathroom to use. We also see them both sweating when they need it. They scratch their own arms until they get a hold of it. Next, we have a recurrent opioid use resulting in a failure to fulfill major role obligations at work, home, or school. Throughout the movie, Dan has a hard time holding a job. Candy has to work as a prostitute at the brothel. Dan also has problems trying to maintain their home. Next is a continued opioid use despite having persistent or recurrent social or interpersonal problems caused by exacerbated by the effects of opioids. In the movie, Dan has lost connection with his own parents due to his opioid use. The couple has also a strained relationship with her parents due to the opioid use. Also, their friend Casper wants to stop using, but ends up using with them and dying from the use. They have problems communicating with each other in a healthy manner due to the substance. Important social, occupational, or recreational activities are given up or reduced because of the opioid use. In the movie, Candy stops painting, which is something she enjoys. Dan stops writing poetry. Dan cannot maintain occupational obligations or activities. Recurrent opioid use in situations in which it is physically hazardous. The beginning of the movie opens to Candy using while in a full tub. She overdoses and is put in danger of drowning. Also, there is multiple scenes of the couple using while driving or in a car, putting them at risk of crashing, which both seem to acknowledge. Continued opioid use despite knowledge of having persistent or recurrent physical or psychological problems that is likely to have been caused or exacerbated by the opioid use. During the times when the couple tries to stop opioids, they are aware of the physical and psychological problems caused by the substance. Dan acknowledges that due to opioids, he can't physically work. Candy psychologically knows she is using the substance to cope with her family and trauma, and states this to her mother. A tolerance, as defined as the following: a need for a markedly increased amounts of opioids to achieve intoxication or desired effects. A markedly diminished effect with continued use of the same amount. Throughout the movie, we see Candy needing more and more to get the same feeling she got in the beginning. The same amount seemed to not have as much of an effect on her than it once had. And then with this one, withdrawal symptoms. When they are trying to quit, they show all of the signs of withdrawal. The couple experiences excessive sweating, chills. The couple has problems sleeping, anxiety, cravings for the substance, irritability, nausea, vomiting, shaking, and shifting moods. Candy even tries to call someone she knows to get the substance in her body just to stop the withdrawal symptoms. In early remission, after full criteria of opioid use disorder were previously met, none of the criteria for opioid use disorder has been met within the last 3 months. At the end of the movie, Candy is released from rehab. We get the sense that she has been in their rehab for 3 to 6 months. Both were presumed clean for those 3 to 6 months, with no opioid use or criteria for opioid use being met. Opioid use disorder includes signs and symptoms that reflect compulsive, prolonged self-administered of opioid substance. Neither Candy or Dan appears to be using opioid for legitimate medical purposes and self-administered the opioid. Individuals with opioid drug use disorder tend to develop such regular patterns of compulsive drug use that daily activities are planned around obtaining and administering opioids. In the first half of the movie, the couple spends all day obtaining opioids and using together. Opioid use disorder can be associated with a history of drug-related crimes. The couple starts stealing and then pawning the stuff they steal early in the movie. Candy also begins selling her body for money illegally. Dan also commits fraud and drains a man's bank account. And then finally, opioid use disorder can begin at any age, but problems associated with opioid use are most common, first observed in the late teens, early 20s. As stated at the beginning, Dan appears to have started using as a teen, while Candy started using in the relationship in her early 20s. So, that is all I've got for that. I'm not going to go into some of this other stuff. I just wanted to talk about the movie Candy, because I really enjoyed it, and I think it's a good portrayal of it and how hard it really is to stop. A lot of people think it's just a matter of quitting, but the chemical has changed your brain so much that it makes it hard to quit. So, thank you for listening.